Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link and in association with HICS Solutions. Today we're looking at how to improve your master data. My name is Susie West and I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm your host for today. I'm very pleased to be introducing two experts within the realms of master data. So we've got Jerry Grable, who is Director E-Business at BAE Systems, and we've got Kostas Silogiannis, who is the CEO at HICS Solutions. So great to have this expertise on the line with us today. You, of course, have a key role to play as well, so please do use this as a very proactive 60 minutes, and that is to make sure that you get your questions answered. Many of the people within the world of shared services have been focusing a lot on supplier data management and master data management over the past number of years. So I know it's a pressing issue for many of you. So please do use this opportunity to get the answers that you're seeking. Just post those questions through to me once you've written them, and I will ask both Jerry and Kostas your questions on your behalf in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. You'll likely want to get a copy of the slides. There's a lot of detail and numbers that are going to be shared with you over the course of the next 60 minutes. So please do go to sharespace.digital and you can go ahead and download the slides there. So very straightforward, just go there after the webinar and get a copy of the slides. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. I'm going to be touching on context. I've got a couple of questions to kick off with, poll questions about you, so please do go ahead and participate in those poll questions. And then we're going to be jumping straight into the BAE system story to understand exactly what their drivers were regarding the need to improve master data management, how they've gone about putting in a solution, and really what their results and accomplishments look like today. And then we'll be handing over to Kostas, who'll be digging down a little bit more into the solution itself. As far as the context is concerned, I mentioned at the top of this webinar that many individuals within many shared services, leaders and directors and GPOs and shared services center managers have been focusing a lot on master data, especially in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So in relative terms, it's actually something that's become a concern late within the shared services evolution. Many shared services organizations where it's now a priority have indeed been in place for maybe 10 or 15 years, but it's now that the master data is a key focus, or at least in the last kind of 2 or 3 years. And I think this comes because there's this realization, well, first of all, a shared services organization pulls together an awful lot of data because of the volume of transactions that a shared services center will manage. But there's this realization that many KPIs that are very important to a shared services organization rely intrinsically on the quality of the master. There is rot within that data, and it's not well managed, and it's not visible, and it's not credible. The data is not credible, it's not reliable, it's not complete, it's not timely, it's not easily accessible. Then that rot has very wide ramifications, and the ramifications will affect the shared services level of productivity. It will affect efficiencies as far as timeliness of process is concerned. It will cause frustration because of a lack of visibility of data, and also it will cause missed opportunities because you're not being able to pull accurate data to be able to see what your spend opportunities and spend saving opportunities might be, for example. So it really is at the root of success within your shared services organization. And our where we've kind of been going on this journey, it does seem like now is an important time to be focusing at this because of where many of the shared services organizations are and the journey that we've taken to get here. But also, again, layering over that is this focus now that many of us are having to the future and looking at tools that are coming into our world, for example, artificial intelligence. And if we really want to be leveraging these tools within the next few years, we must be getting the data set clean and accurate. So with a little bit of context there, which I'm sure will resonate with many of you, I'm very pleased that we do have Jerry, who's going to be sharing his story with us shortly. And he's in particular going to be talking about how BAE Systems bought supplier management within their shared services organization. It's serving 10 business units within the US. And bear in mind that they're operating off 8 ERPs. So just before we go into Jerry's story, I'd just like to share with you a couple of poll questions, please. So if you could kindly read these and participate in them. I'll be closing them shortly and then be sharing the results with you live. So let's have a look at the first poll question. How would you rate the quality of your master data management today? Would you say excellent, we are confident with our data, and would you say good, data is overall good quality but perhaps could be improved? Fair, we know that there are some issues, we are looking to improve this. I apologise, some of the words have been chopped off here. Or is it poor? Your master data often causes you problems or concerns within your actual process itself. Let's try and get this number of participants up to 60 or 70%. We're currently at about 55% of you responding. So a few more seconds until we close this poll down. For those of you that haven't participated, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Let's share these results. So we have 72% of you responding there. So let's start at the top there, as far as the highest number, 38% of you saying that the quality of the master data management is fair. We know that there are some issues and we're looking to improve this, followed by 31% of you saying it's good, but it could be improved. 23% of you saying poor, it causes problems with our process. 8% of you are saying it is excellent today. So thank you for that. Let's just go to the second poll question. I would like to find out, please, how you actually manage your master data today. So if you could let us know, how do you manage the main way in which you manage your master data today? Is it mainly through your ERP? Is it mainly through an ERP and some third-party tools? Mainly through a third-party tool? Mainly with an in-house tool? Or is there another option which hasn't quite been articulated here? So how do you currently manage your master data today? We are on 57% of you responding. If you haven't already done so, please do select the box appropriate to you, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, 73% of you responding there, so many thanks indeed. Let's have a look at the results. The winner here at 49% is with our ERP and some third-party tools, so a little bit of a hybrid setup, followed at 34% with just the ERP. 12% of you said other, 5% use an in-house tool, and none of you just use exclusively a third-party tool. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to hand over to Jerry. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Ms. West, for that introduction, and good morning or good afternoon to you all. My name is Jerry Grable. I am the Director of e-Business for BAE Systems, Inc. My organization focuses on harmonizing and automating our procurement capabilities across our U.S. sector, with a focus of increasing efficiency, ensuring compliance to various regulations, and consolidating and normalizing our data. And today we're going to talk about a key project that we implemented a couple of years ago, which was implementing a supplier management process with HICS Solutions. But first, I want to give you a quick overview of BAE Systems, which I think will start to define some of the drivers behind us needing to deploy a supplier management tool. BAE Systems is a global aerospace and defense company. We have 5 key markets around the world and have approximately 83,000 skilled employees located in over 40 countries. We do engineering, manufacturing, service, information technology. Some of our military products include tracked vehicles, aircraft, naval guns, protective wear, and armor. We have commercial products that focus on hybrid vehicle technology and commercial aircraft flight and engine controls, as well as cabin controls. And then we have a large service sector, which provides information technology services such as cyber solutions, as well as ship repair for servicing and overhauling both military and commercial vessels. So these are not all of our product offerings, but hopefully it gives you a sense of the very diverse supply base that we have, the diverse set of requirements that we have to hold them to, and how onboarding and maintaining this supply base of about 40,000 active suppliers can be a big challenge. So this is a look at our US market. This is the market that I am responsible for with respect to automation. We have 4 sectors containing around 10 business units. Again, we are primarily defense, but we have some commercial, and again, a wide range of products and services which drive unique supplier onboarding requirements. We are a company built on acquisitions, so we do have multiple ERP systems across these sectors that don't talk to one another. So prior to Hicks, most of our supplier onboarding activities were disparate between the sectors. They were executed manually through traditional methods such as email, and suppliers had to register individually with each of these businesses, which resulted in multiple registrations throughout the year. We didn't have any digitization of data or centralized storage, and we had very limited controls to ensure that our required information was collected prior to approving a supplier. And we had audit findings in that area. So we recognized that a change was needed, and we started our journey of pursuing an application such as Hicks to assist with harmonizing and automating those processes as much as possible. So this is a look here at our key drivers. I mentioned a couple of them, but there's really 3 key drivers for our pursuit of a supplier management solution. The first, again, being to harmonize our supplier management process across our US market. Again, we have 10 business units operating in silos, driven by similar regulations, but not sharing or reusing the data, which was creating duplicate work for our common suppliers, created inconsistencies in the way that we onboarded and managed our suppliers. So when you looked at the process and the forms that each of our businesses were using, most of it was very similar with some legitimate differences based on, their individual business types. So we were confident that our intent to harmonize these processes and forms could be done, and it was certainly needed. Again, about 20% of our supply base is common to one business, so that this would reduce the repetitive effort, and in the end, I can tell you it ended up being a 69% reduction. The next driver was really to digitize, consolidate, and normalize our supplier data. There were really multiple reasons for this. One, we wanted to eliminate the form storage throughout the company and digitize it so that we and our auditors could access it remotely. This also helps protect the information long-term from loss or damage, which we had experienced. And then certainly when you digitize things, you open the door to now being able to track that information electronically. The second thing is we really wanted to consolidate the data so that we had a single repository of all of our approved suppliers containing the information that we access on a regular basis. So these are things like supplier contacts and tax forms, quality certifications, proprietary information agreements. We had a lot of, where do I find this document in our company? So this would give them that one-stop shop, to simplify that. And then third, we wanted to normalize the supplier information to improve spend analytics downstream. Common suppliers were spelled, X different ways in each of our ERP systems, which made spend analytics more difficult. So by normalizing that information, it feeds our ERP systems and all downstream systems very consistently. And then we were also looking for a global unique identifier for each of the suppliers so that it would link our various ERP system IDs together so that when we were talking about a supplier globally, we knew which one. And then finally, our third driver was really to ensure and to improve compliance to policies and regulations with each supplier onboarding that we did. Again, that's very hard to ensure with paper forms, but with an application, you can predefine your requirements and the workflows will ensure that those requirements happen each time. So the requirements are hard-coded in the system, but of course we can override them if needed, which is really limited to business admins that are authorized to make those decisions. And then this bottom section here really focuses around the main focus areas. We're not going to talk about them in detail, but debarment alerts, just as an example, was something that we really wanted to automate. So by linking HICS to the SAM.gov website, that interface is regularly searching for debarments, and if it finds one, then it alerts us of a potential match. So this reduces the manual labor of looking for those debarments, but more importantly, it allows us to react quickly, when something does occur. So if we take a look at, the consolidation of access points, this slide here is a bit cartoonish, but visually it kind of reiterates the before and after of how historically we had to access multiple systems to get the various sets of information that we needed on a supplier. And much of that information was being collected manually. Now we have a single repository within HICS, and much of that information is being collected in an automated fashion. And then we've also established a number of interfaces with several of our ERP systems, which automates the loading of new suppliers from HICS into the ERP, as well as updates and existing suppliers. So kind of moving on to route to solution, as is typical with these types of projects, we generated a business case defining the hard and soft benefits. We evaluated several solutions such as Oracle, Dun & Bradstreet, Ariba. These were solutions that we already had in-house in other areas of the business. But in the end, we really chose HICS for a couple of reasons. One, they were a SaaS solution, which in our view simplifies the infrastructure, thus reducing cost. So no hardware, don't have to worry about disaster recovery, things like that. And then you also get to take advantage of the continued software updates, which HICS does supply as their roadmap advances. And the second was that at the time, they were really the only one that had the flexible solution that we needed, which was a shared environment across our 10 business units, but still providing each of our business units the full autonomy over their suppliers. So each business wanted to share the supplier's information, but they wanted to approve or reject the supplier based on their requirements. So a supplier can be rejected for one business, but it can be approved for another. And then HICS really, they also had the ability to hold local information, which is specific to each of our BAE systems, which is important for executing integration, which again, we have done with several of our businesses. So let's take a look at project benefits. This is a high-level look at the project benefits, which resulted in a 13 full-time equivalent, or FTE, reduction opportunity. If you look at just supplier onboarding and profile maintenance, the reduction in labor exceeded 13,000 hours annually, much of which was driven by the automation that the HICS solution brings. For supplier onboarding, as an example, we submit the request and the system takes over collecting the information based on the predefined business requirements, which also includes regular reminders to both internal and external users of any open tasks that they may have. Profile maintenance, along with document management, are set up with expiration periods which the system tracks. And when they come due, the system automatically generates a new task for the supplier to complete. So these are all things that we were doing manually with people across, again, a very large, diverse supply base. And now 80% of it is automated. So taking a look at the design elements, now we have the business case approved, and it's time to get into design and implementation. It kicked off in late 2013, took about a year to complete. We are a complex company, so we did ask for a number of configurations, which is why it took us about a year to do it. And I believe most of those configurations are now part of the base product. This slide here really shows some of the design areas that HICS walks clients through, but are also areas where we as a company were focused on normalizing so that we could execute supplier management very consistently across the business. We're not going to talk about all of them, but workflows as an example is something that impacts the supplier onboarding process from start to finish. And within our business is now 99% common across the company. There were lots of discussion in this area with respect to who really needs to be a part of the approval process. And in the end, we ended up shaving off several days, and within some businesses, several weeks off the existing process by standardizing and eliminating the non-value added tabs. Similar in normalizing the information requirements, which were the various forms that were being used by each of the businesses to collect information, are now global and very consistent. This area eliminated 70% of the repetitive actions for our common suppliers. And then, of course, the other elements that you see here are now common to the way that we onboard suppliers. This allows us to execute supplier management very, very consistently. And an indirect side effect is that for people that may move around our business in different roles, which is not uncommon, this is certainly one process that they'll now know without having to relearn it. So really the thing I'd stress on the slide is, make sure that you give each one of these its due time when defining them to ensure that it's fully agreed, it's understood, and then challenge any consistencies as they arise to just make sure that that uniqueness is valid. So let's take a quick look at the information requirements that we did define. Again, when we went live, we were able to harmonize many of these into common initiatives. The remaining ones that are in the middle and the right column truly are unique to those businesses based on what they do. So those are, again, unique to those businesses. But for the common initiatives, as suppliers complete them for one business unit, it simply copies into the other relationships that may get completed or created in the future. And again, this really starts to save a lot of time for both internal users and external users when you're onboarding several thousand suppliers a year. So on the process improvements, in the end, our project did deploy on time, and I'm happy to say that we, did achieve everything that we set out to achieve. We consolidated and harmonized our supplier listing. We have all of our supplier information in one repository, which includes quality and tax and safety. We normalized and harmonized 10 disparate systems into one. And certainly we rationalized our supplier requirements across Inc., creating, a pretty sizable set of global requirements. And then, again, when you get into digitization, the system is really tracking a great deal of the activity. We've automated 80% of it, and our workflows and electronic signatures and all of that are in the system and very common. So again, all of these were critical to achieving that compliant, efficient process that we were looking for, and it's been a success. So let's take a look at some metrics from last year just to kind of give you a sense of the annual volume that we see in the solution. Last year we onboarded about 9,400 suppliers, and 75% of those registrations are complete, which is very, very good. We had 238,000 actions in the system last year. So that is, you know, people requesting suppliers, it's suppliers updating data, it's workflows being executed. To date, we've collected 173,000 questionnaires across our 40,000 supply base. And we're doing all of that stuff in about 6.5 days, which again is very, very good. And you can see we'll have about 3,500 documents expiring this year. And again, the system is tracking all of that. It's issuing new tasks when they come due. Suppliers submit them and we're done. So again, tons of automation, and you know, hopefully this kind of stresses why applications like this are certainly key to a robust management process, you know, kind of as we've discussed. So my last slide is really around lessons learned, which of course all of our projects have. You know, we're not going to touch on all of them, but you know, one of the big ones for us was really around, again, harmonizing our questionnaires and how we went about doing it. You know, we essentially gathered all of the active questionnaires from all of our 10 business units. We laid them out. We harmonized the common questions by subject, and then we asked the businesses, which of the remaining questions do you want added? And of course, we added them all. So this ended up leading to very large questionnaires with a bunch of non-value added questions, and suppliers didn't want to answer them. So we eventually went back and we eliminated any question that wasn't directly used for either approving a supplier, it wasn't used for compliance reasons, or it wasn't used to be able to search for them in the system. Okay, and at that point, we saw our onboarding cycle times drop significantly, and the complaints from suppliers virtually disappeared. So the lesson is be strict about the content that you're asking your suppliers to complete, and get rid of everything that just truly isn't needed. Okay. Another one was really around the initial data load that we did. Prior to going live, we did load HICS with all of our active suppliers from our various ERP systems. This took a tremendous amount of effort to extract, combine them into a master file, and then normalize the data into common names, tax IDs, addresses, etc. We spent several weeks on the activity, but we got a late start, and it started to press us up against the final testing and the go live date. So the other thing was that the direction from each of the businesses was to provide only those suppliers that they were using over the last 18 months. But what we found out after we went live is that they gave us a lot more data than that. We never validated what they gave us. So we get into the system, we start utilizing it, we start asking the business questions, and they're saying, oh, don't worry about that. We haven't used that supplier in a long time, so you can ignore it. So again, all of this rushing and delay in getting started with data cleansing, you know, led to some data issues, and again, led to us spending effort on cleaning suppliers that we really didn't need to deal with. So don't leave your data till the end, and make sure that you really validate what people are giving you. And really the last one is really on the good side, has to do with support. So we had very good support from our executive team, which was being driven from our sector president. And this was really the carrot that kept certain businesses moving when you needed that extra push. You know, throw out the president's name and you can certainly get people moving. This project dealt with culture change. And as you know, people can get ingrained in how they always operate. So support from the top down is key in my opinion. And then also, you know, combining that with very regular project updates with the business leads can just kind of help slowly evolve people into that new way of doing things. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kostas with HICS Solutions, but thank you very much for giving me that time to share our story. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Jerry. Very interesting data points and information there. I'm sure will be useful to everyone. So I don't know how many are familiar with HICS, but maybe just provide a very brief introduction and then talk a little bit about how we went about ensuring success at BAE. So HICS as a company has been around just over 10 years, since 2004. We're headquartered out of London, and we have satellite offices in Chicago and also in Dubai, serving other regions. In terms of our customers, it's not particular to any specific industry. It tends to be large, complicated organizations who have either difficult compliance requirements, lots of suppliers, and that can range from services sectors to defense to energy to pharmaceuticals, etc. So we work and have a lot of experience across multiple industries. In terms of our approach as a platform, what you would have noted from maybe Jerry's presentation is it's not a one-size-fits-all. And if you look at sort of our customers, you know, they'll all have different requirements depending on their industry, their size, their priorities, their ERP systems. So when you think about master data management or data management solutions, it's not something where you can just say, oh, we're just going to do it like that and it's going to work for everyone. So when we went about it, it was more about creating a platform and thought of it as Lego. As you have Lego, which can create different things very quickly in a consistent and repeatable manner, we came up with different building blocks, which then allowed us to create these standard solutions, but which could have a high degree of configurability to make it match our customers' needs. So it is master data management, but that can also take the label of different shapes and forms depending on the customer requirements. It could be supplier management, supplier information management, and so forth. So why would you use a platform like HICS? The main reasons which customers sort of list is flexibility of data model. As we said, it's not one size fits all. You need to be able to support one or many different ERP systems. You need to have different governance processes, so hence our workflow engine. You have different forms. You need to be able to import and export data. And you also need to be able to connect and automate a lot of these things. And ultimately, what we're trying to achieve is provide something which is very automated, very centralized, and provide it at a very low total cost of ownership, not just during, let's say, the initial rollout, but on an ongoing basis. Having something so flexible means that as your requirements change, it's going to be easy for you to change and adapt things as you go along. That's a little bit about us. Now, in terms of understanding supplier master data, I thought we'd start off by looking at some of the barriers which are listed as for digital transformation for supplier management. And I picked this little slide here because I found it pretty interesting looking at last year's Deloitte survey of chief procurement officers as what they listed as the barrier. You know, it was interesting to see quality of data, lack of data integration were the top two, and then current technology was at number 4. And why is this interesting? It's because, you know, garbage in, garbage out, I think in business has been around for such a long time. And as Susie said in the beginning, it only seems that people are realizing it's now, maybe because they've implemented a lot of transactional systems, spend analytics systems, or general sort of information decision-making systems, and they're seeing that, hey, maybe it's not technology and there's something else for us to actually be able to have good data, which is needed. And I have a quote which we've come up with, which is also to just put out there and ponder for a moment before I talk about it. But, you know, only 2 moments matter in a piece of data's lifetime, and that's the moment it's created and the moment it is used. Now, just let you think for a moment. But essentially, this phrase here for me captures really the problem with supplier data. And if I can illustrate with just some examples what that problem is. So we have, if you think of an organization, you have people that will create supplier data. So let's call them data producers. That could be in finance, that could be in supply chain, in procurement, in quality, so compliance functions. So they all have, you know, the need to create some form of data, and that's when data is created. Later on, further down the chain, we may extract it, we may massage the data, we may combine it with other bits of data, and of course, further on in our organization, people will use it for analysis, to prepare reports, to report upwards, etc., etc. And of course, cross-functionally, even more kind of discussions happen, and generally because everyone's pulling data from different sources, you'll have a lot of alignment which needs to take place. So we make sure that we're all talking about the same thing before we present it, because what you don't want to do is one person says A and the other person says B. And I'm sure we've all faced that. And that's really, if you think about it, the problem with supplier data is it's used by everyone. And the people that create data are not the ones that actually use it. But because they don't know how data necessarily is going to be used, and because we measure it much later in its life when we actually go to use it, there is this large disconnect. And what you're trying to achieve by introducing master data management is to try and bring together very early on in the process when data is created to make sure that it's going to be fit for purpose for how data is going to be used later on. So looking a little bit at implementation approaches, the way we go about creating a solution for our customers is actually threefold. You need to address governance, business process, and the technical solution. And for me, the third one, the technical solution, by the way, is the least important one. Everyone thinks about technology as being the key thing and meeting your requirements. But the reality is, if you haven't defined the first two items, you don't really know what your requirements are. So it's always a mistake to just look at the technology. You know, the challenges with, and as we also heard from Jerry, is, you know, alignment between stakeholders, who owns the data, people want control of their data, you have different processes. So if we need to address all three, and also in that sequence, we need to talk about governance, then define processes and data, and then we can leverage a technology to help us bring that all to life. But without the first two, projects are really doomed for failure. So you could have the best technology, but without the other two, you're not going to have a successful implementation. Whereas you could have the other two, and maybe not the best technology, and actually be very successful. Obviously, you want the best of both worlds, but you know, priority should be on governance and process first. So in terms of project methodology, taking this now one step further, what are things you really need to think about? And this is kind of sequential, and there's a reason why you do certain things before other things. So step one, by the way, is to have the vision of where you want to end up, and also key part of that, and again, Jerry said this, is you need executive sponsorship. This is going to be a business transformation project, not an IT project, and you will need people backing this from the top in order to facilitate alignment and things like that further down. So once you have that, then we need to work first on governance, and that typically means first defining the data governance board. Typically that'll be cross-functionally by IT, finance, and supply chain or procurement, so whoever owns the supplier data, and it should be cross-functional because different people will own different parts of the data. And then the governance board effectively should define roles and responsibilities of what we call the data stewardship organization. So again, who owns global data, so things which are common, let's say a name and a tax ID needs to be owned globally, things which are local would be owned within the businesses. Then we need to define standards and definitions. So again, things like what is an active supplier. We saw that also with BAE, people have different definitions. You end up loading the wrong kind of data. Then we think of things like survivorship rules. So you'll have multiple ERP systems, maybe duplicate records in your data, which one stays, which one goes. If these things are actually not agreed when you go to clean up your data later on, you're going to waste a lot of time agreeing with people what is the right thing, hence why you want to do all these things up front. Other things to consider are what's referred to as duplicates by design. So lot of ERP systems have, or businesses have, existing limitations of why we will need to have a duplicate for XYZ reasons. So you will come up to those scenarios, but they should be agreed up front. And then the last item is, how are we going to measure data quality and performance of the data organization? So it's important that these elements are defined initially. Once we have that, then move to the next stage, which is talking about process design, and also institutionalize that with operating procedures. And then we'd look at cleanup, consolidation, and also data maintenance. And the last part we touch is the system. So looking at the vision aspect, and this will be more for your use later on when the slides are sent over, but it's important, as I mentioned, to understand the end state and contextualize that to where you are as an organization today and where you want to get to, and figure out, what's actually achievable in all of the different areas. And of course, that should be linked to the actual objectives, right? So, what do we want to achieve? So this is helpful to understand. We're going to be fully centralized. We'll have one vendor number, or we cannot have one vendor number. So in each of the areas, you should map out, when we're fully done, what is the end state, and then obviously create a roadmap for how to actually get there. Now, typical project phases, which we want to be looking at, and of course doesn't always happen like this, but phase one should be around analysis and cleansing. Everyone makes a lot of assumptions about their data, and our experience has shown that these assumptions tend to be wrong. So everyone will say their data tends to be much better than it is, but you need to validate all of your assumptions. You should never make any assumptions. So step one is going to be doing that analysis and also doing some initial cleanup of your data, which is then going to facilitate the next phase. And the next phase of a project should be looking at data consolidation. So that's actually when you need to centralize all of this disparate data into a single platform. There's actually processes which should be defined to support data consolidation. And normally we refer to that as having match and merge processes. So as data is loaded, you match it with the existing data and you merge it based on the rules which you've defined. And this provides a structured approach for bringing in and consolidating data into a centralized platform, which is an area which, again, a lot of P2P projects in our experience suffer because they have a real challenge to actually consolidate data, especially when they have multiple ERP systems. Once data has been consolidated, phase three is data maintenance. So that's looking at the operational aspects. And we tend to look at 4 distinct business processes which have to be identified, which is how data is created, how data is updated, and then the deactivation process. So how we don't really delete data, but how we deactivate suppliers, and also actually how you reactivate suppliers. So again, if a supplier has been unused for the last 3 years, are we just going to unblock them, or should there be a process around what happens? So all of these are processes which will be backed with workflow, looking at global data and local data throughout all of these processes, because some things are shared and some things are localized. And then the last step is obviously going live, which means migrating data and integrating your ERP systems. And when you have multiple ERP systems, and that's obviously a challenge because data is constantly being created, for how do you keep your data in sync as you're rolling out this project. And on that note, there's also rollout considerations which should be thought of. And the way you balance sort of how you're going to roll out is actually balancing typically technical complexity with organizational or change management complexity. So for example, a big bang approach may have very low data and technical complexity, but will have very high organizational complexity. So of course, most large organizations would rule that one out, because you need a massive project team to be able to handle huge change management effort as a big bang. Then you could consider doing it regionally or by business unit or by local organization or system by system if you have multiple ERP systems. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong way. It's again about understanding your organization's environment, the size of your project team, your timelines, etc. All of that will dictate which approach is the right one for your organization. Thinking of a typical project plan, and this again will be useful to you later on when you receive the slides rather than right now. We need to look at multiple work streams, and I don't want to go into details of each one of them, but it's just to show you that it's not just about technology, and we need to be addressing all of the other elements, and we tend to structure them into different work streams as part of the program beyond just the technical aspect. So you'll see number 5, the technical build is actually quite a small period, and what tends to be the biggest challenge is business alignment and also ongoing business alignment as you're rolling out your project, as well as data. So business alignment and data are the two biggest risks which such projects face. So hopefully that helps. That's helpful in terms of understanding how we structure a project. Now, why is supplier master data important? And maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but we see it in many areas. Some areas may be very, very clear to everyone, other areas less so. The first one is actually better alignment or speaking the same language. It's very often the case that different functions have different definitions about things, and if you're not on the same page, you're obviously going to be inefficient as an organization. You're going to waste time reconciling things, aligning your reports, making sure they say the same data. So I think supplier master data management as a discipline and bringing all your stakeholders together under a central system and a central workflow provides this alignment and actually gets you talking the same language, which I think is critical to being efficient as a business. The second area is around integration. So again, integration itself is not something which is complicated. What makes integration between systems complicated is data. And if you have good master data, then integration becomes something very, very straightforward. Efficiency, so removing duplicated process, improving decision making, everything becomes faster. Analytics and insights. So again, here it could be we're at the dawn of big data, but bringing it to more tangible things. We may all have had sort of BI or reporting solutions or spend analytics tools, or even big data. It's the same issue. It's garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of these solutions, without good data, they're just expensive technical solutions. And the last one is machine learning and AI. Machine learning and AI is actually an area which we're heavily involved in now, with all the new things which we're doing. But the more structured your data is and the better defined it is of how it's used and what you do with it, it actually improves your AI and machine learning capabilities dramatically. So again, it's something which would fall victim to garbage in, garbage out. So these are some of the key areas. Now I've put here some myth busters for us, because I think a lot of people talk about single ERP or P2P systems, and it was even mentioned, I think, during the poll that a lot of us are managing master data within our ERP systems. Actually, an ERP system is not necessarily a good place to manage master data, purely because it does not provide workflow or control around that or around data standards. People tend to create a record in an ERP system because they need to raise an order, they need to pay an invoice. And the same thing, P2P system is a transactional system. So it's not meant to manage master data, and a P2P system will follow the ERP system, which means if you have 3 ERP systems and 3 times the same vendor in each one of those, you're going to load all 3 of those vendors in your P2P system. So for us, it's important to conclude that a transactional system is not fit for purpose for managing supplier data, and we should differentiate a system which is used for transactions versus a system which is used for managing master data. And also an MDM solution can actually form an excellent backend to your P2P solution, because it basically will help you harmonize that disparate landscape across different ERP systems. So in summary, our view is that, supplier master data management is the foundation for any supplier related process. So whether it's going to be in finance, procurement, supply chain, it doesn't really matter. If you haven't established this, it's going to be a struggle. And actually it should be the precursor to any kind of implementation around supplier related projects. Always keep in mind, this is not an IT project. It is a business transformation. And to dedicate enough time to align common definitions and how data is used, that's really one of the big benefits is around this alignment. And with that, it's governance and process are the key areas to address first, and we shouldn't think of it purely just on the basis of the technology. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass it back to Susie now for Q&A.
Thank you, Costas, and thank you, Jerry. So a number of questions have come through. If you haven't already submitted your question, please do so. There's a lot of material there, and I'm sure that's inspired a lot of questions in your mind. Whilst we move through to Q&A, we've got another poll question, which is coming up on your screen now, so please do participate that. We'd like to find out if you're looking to further automation within your department. So if you could tick the appropriate box there, and I'll leave that open whilst we move to Q&A. So first question, this one's for you, Jerry. As far as project deployment was concerned, could you talk a little bit about who was the person, job title-wise, job function-wise, that led that project, and how long did it take to reduce the heads from 21 to I think it was 7?
Yep. So I was the one personally that led the project. Again, being responsible for automation, harmonization across the Inc. I was kind of in the lead of that. We certainly had some internal IT folks that served as project management, so they put the project plan together. And then, of course, Costas has truly also assisted with managing it. So we went live in kind of a couple of phases. We went live with the solution itself for all of the supplier onboarding and so forth, which immediately produced 4 headcount reduction. And then as time went on and we were able to get the systems, trusting the system, again, it's that culture change. Other businesses started to drop out, or other headcount started to drop out over the next year. And then when we went live with the integrations, which was about a year and a half later, that reduced about 3 more heads. So we haven't gotten to our full 13 head yet. We are now looking at making this more embedded in the shared service function that I'm a part of. But right now we've experienced probably about 9 headcount reduction over about a year and a half.
Okay, good, thank you. There's another poll question that's open now. It's regarding the LATAM Shared Services Leaders Summit. That is a digital event, and that's in February, and the March European Leaders event taking place in London. Let's move on to the next question. So I'll put this to both of you, maybe starting with Costas first. With increased attempts to hijack payments, and obviously an increase in kind of criminal activity regarding that, how do you secure or validate change requests such as banking information from suppliers? So we'll start with Costas on that, please.
Yeah, so I think there's obviously different ways this can be done and with varying degrees of sophistication. So obviously the most basic way is going to be making sure you have workflow around that. Okay, so as soon as a supplier submits a change, then obviously you have someone who's going to review and approve it. Before it comes to that, though, there's a couple of automated checks you can definitely do, and also sanity checks. So some customers put restrictions like the bank account has to be in the same country. The name of the bank account has to match the name of the supplier. And then there's also other methods which, of course, incur additional prices, which is doing penny drops or $0 transactions as well, which you can use through connections with third-party API services, which we have.
Great. And how about you, Jerry? What's your experience as an end user of the portal dealing with change requests from suppliers to do with bank information, etc.?
Yeah, so as Kostas mentioned, we certainly use workflow. So suppliers that go into the system that try to make changes to addresses on any of the locations, whether they're purchasing or manufacturing or payment, those route to a data steward for them to review. It's a global data steward, someone under my organization. And then we also have an AP shared service across the US. So we have one set of folks that are operating to a set of standards, and they will not make a payment to a payment location without having an invoice with that company's letterhead showing that address. So it's a combination really of having, an invoice on the letterhead combined with a supplier change in HIX requesting that new address. And those two things together then allow the change to be approved and the payment made.
That's great, thank you. And it's a kind of it's a similar, certainly associated question, again regarding validation, but this is more the validation rules that are built within the solution. So what validation rules are built within the solution to ensure that the tax ID is valid and the bank ID is legitimate, etc.? Maybe Kostas, you could take that one for me.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have, by the way, 31 different third-party data providers or external validations. Specifically for US tax IDs, there's a tax ID and name match, which goes out directly to the IRS. So to do that kind of validation, and similarly, there are other services for other jurisdictions. So if it's within the EU, then obviously there's something else to validate VAT numbers. We have something else to validate Australian business numbers and so forth. So there is a lot of third-party services available, and all of that should happen in real time as the suppliers enter in their data. And it's very similar with bank data. And again, bank data, it's less straightforward because there's nothing apart from doing a $0 or penny drop to actually validate an account exists. But at least you can validate, that IBANs or ABA routing numbers are correctly structured, etc. Okay,
good. Now, Jerry, you talked quite a lot about the questionnaires during your session and how important it is to get these questionnaires right. Could you just talk a little bit more about the kinds of questions that you had on the questionnaires and the length of those questionnaires that meant that you had a higher supplier participation?
Yeah, certainly. So we have a questionnaire called General Capabilities. It used to be probably 40 questions that was just asking the supplier about their business. What products and services do you provide? What are the commodity codes that you have and so forth. And that questionnaire specifically became everyone's kind of pet project where they wanted to shove every question in there that they could think of. Do you have security clearances? Are you a union shop? And if so, what is your union number and your expiration date and so forth? So again, when we kind of went down through that questionnaire initially, it became very large. And then again, at some point, we just started to look at it and say, what are you actually doing with this information? How does this change your decision about the supplier? How does this allow you to, or help you approve them and so forth? Again, we have probably around 50 questionnaires overall that touch on all kinds of subjects, counterfeit parts, international trade and things, but it was really a matter of going through each one and just eliminating the questions that really weren't important to making a final decision.
Okay, good. So the kind of the reduced question set ended up being how many questions roughly? It was about, did you say 40?
Yeah, I mean, just in that one initiative, we probably went from like 40, it went down to 10, actually.
Went down to 10. That's very positive.
Down to 10. Yep.
Great. So it can be done. All right, good. Well, look, that was incredibly helpful and useful, that session today. So thank you very much to Jerry, and thank you to Costas for sharing their expertise and their time with us today. And thank you for joining us. We have a number of exciting webinars coming up over the next couple of weeks. So please do make sure that you are familiar with them and register yourself or your team for them. And of course, I mentioned earlier, we have 2 events coming up in February and in March. Thank you for your time and attention today. We look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.